I had a question from numerous safety 3796, and this was from a long time ago. I also was kind of putting this off, much like you were with the last question. I just didn't want to get into it because it's about ashwagandha and performance effects. So the question is basically, what are my thoughts about ashwagandha for physical performance? And it also specifically refers to a meta-analysis. Now, when I first got this question, I was like, cool, a meta-analysis. I love digging into those. If you're a mass subscriber, like I had a really painful hobby for a while there of kind of taking metas apart, finding some little calculation errors, and then putting them back together. Um, I say it was a painful hobby because that takes so long if there's more than like 4 studies. So anyway, I opened this up thinking it'd be an opportunity because I know the ashwagandha exercise literature is not that big. So I was like, oh, I can dig into this and probably find some errors and put it back together. I think the meta-analysis itself was done quite well. My concern is I just think the body of literature is so scattered and inconsistent. And I think the mechanisms are so vague. I truly don't know what to do with it. And usually when I'm there with a supplement, I say, listen, if you're really intrigued and you want to give it a shot, there's enough safety data to suggest that as long as it's not an adulterated product and not just, and you're following dosing guidelines, like, yeah, if you want to take a crack at it, take a crack at it. But I haven't seen enough evidence, despite the existence of this meta-analysis, to really feel good about recommending ashwagandha for performance purposes. If you look around at some of the research that people often point at when it comes to ashwagandha as a performance booster, there was one paper that I see floating around every now and then that, like over the course of, I think, maybe 8 weeks or so, it was kind of a standard length for a training intervention. It was like 8, maybe 10 weeks or so. The ashwagandha group added 46 kilograms to their bench press. And so, like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it was 8 weeks. So maybe that happened. Maybe it didn't. But if it did happen,
That's a lot of kilos.
my question is, to whom does that really generalize? Ashwagandha is not going to add 46 kilograms to your bench press. So I don't know what to do with that particular finding. But that's one that a lot of people get excited about. And to be fair, like maybe they were just really, 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 really untrained. There was no familiarization. And so it was just like, hey, over the next 8 weeks, we are going to teach you how to bench press and sprinkle in some additional supplement magic. And here we go. But in any case, there's nothing that I can do with that. Right.
Yeah.
So there's also, if you look at the effect sizes within this meta-analysis, you would kind of be left to conclude that ashwagandha is more effective than creatine by a pretty comfortable margin. And I find that to be implausible at this point in time, just because of inconsistency from study to study. And also, like I mentioned, the mechanism doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Some papers will talk very vaguely about ashwagandha's mechanisms and say like, well, it's, you're doing these stressful things and ashwagandha will make them less stressful. And all of a sudden you're benching 46 more kilograms. And I'm like, you got to get me closer to how I got those 46 kilograms.
Yeah. I mean, if that is the relevant mechanism, just like, dude, you should see a similar ergogenic effect from smoking weed.
Right.
But just doing a little something to take the edge off in the evening.
But yeah, I mean, I was looking at one paper and it says it referred to, this is a quote, anti-stress effects, neuroprotective effects, immunomodulatory effects, and rejuvenating effects via the herb's interplay with the nervous system, the endocrine system, the cardiopulmonary system, energy production system, and the immune system, including analgesic, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, anti-tumor, anti-stress, anti-diabetic, neuroprotective, immunoprotective, and cardioprotective effects.
Good shit.
So like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, it just does all things in all contexts. So, but when you start to dig into it a little bit, you basically will find 2 primary like specific mechanisms. One is cortisol reduction, which I don't think you could really say yeah, cortisol is leading to the effects we see in that meta-analysis, effects of that magnitude.
Man, and in addition to that, there was a paper, I think it came from Stu Phillips's lab, maybe like 2013, 2014, thereabouts. Like back when the acute hormone hypothesis for training adaptations was kind of the hot topic, and people were doing research to see, like, does that seem to be like the primary mechanism for muscular adaptations. So they had a paper where they were looking at the correlations um, between hormonal responses to training and resistance training adaptations. It was either strength gains or hypertrophy. It was one of the two. Um, but if memory serves, because I didn't pull this paper up before recording, if memory serves, they looked at changes in testosterone, cortisol, um, growth hormone, IGF-1. I think it was those four. And none of them were associated with training adaptations except for cortisol, which was positively associated with training adaptations.
Right.
So, like, I wouldn't necessarily want to take correlation data from a single paper at face value. But I mean, of the human data that I'm aware of, a relatively large cortisol response post training probably either doesn't meaningfully predict training adaptations or might be positively predictive of training adaptations. So, like, if that's the main mechanism you're hanging your hat on, like, oh yeah, this reduces cortisol, I don't know. I don't even know that that's a good thing.
Right. And there is a distinction between, kind of basal resting cortisol
Yeah.
throughout the day versus the acute fluctuations from training. But
Yeah, for sure.
again, there's minimal evidence to suggest that a little reduction in cortisol, whether we're talking about during exercise, post exercise, or throughout the day, is going to have dramatic effects on body composition performance. And then sometimes people say, well, no, it's affecting the HPA or the HPG axis, but it's more affecting testosterone. It's increasing testosterone. And ashwagandha is not increasing your testosterone enough to have those types of ergogenic effects. You need a big change in testosterone to have a significant ergogenic effect on that magnitude.
Has anyone checked to see the ecdysterone content of ashwagandha?
That's a good question. Another mechanism that does come up is sometimes they say, listen, it's got antioxidant properties and that's good. But I wrote an article for Stronger by Science about antioxidants. There are many of them. They do antioxidant things quite well, and they do not have these types of performance outcomes. So maybe, to be fair, maybe ashwagandha is remarkably efficacious as an ergogenic aid, and we simply have no idea what the mechanism is. But to me, that's not enough to get me really to latch onto a supplement and recommend it. I need to see, consistent, plausible effect sizes that make sense based on a mechanism that has been supported by some experimental research.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, there's just really a disconnect where the effect sizes are really big. There are very few of them. They are a bit inconsistent from study to study. I can't really point to a mechanism that would tie it all together. So when it comes to ashwagandha for performance, I'm personally going to sit this out. I've taken ashwagandha before for an extended period of time because there is some amount of evidence suggesting that it might help with attenuating symptoms of like very mild anxiety. So I've taken it for that. Whether or not I experienced a placebo effect from it, I don't really know. It didn't like change my life, but it seemed fine. But I certainly didn't notice pronounced ergogenic effects when I was taking ashwagandha for that type of outcome. So, if you're super intrigued by it, by all means, you can give it a shot. Just make sure you're not getting an adulterated product. Make sure you're taking it within recommended dosage guidelines. You can take a shot on it if you'd like, but personally, I don't see strong evidence supporting an ergogenic effect with plausible, consistent effect sizes with a mechanism that would explain how it would be doing that type of thing. But I do want to say, I want to acknowledge that, this does kind of fall under that Ayurvedic medicine umbrella. There are some traditions and cultures in which ashwagandha is held in really high regard. And so I don't mean to be disrespectful to any of those traditional elements or cultural elements. If you really like using ashwagandha for reasons that are based on, culture, tradition, whatever the case may be, I'm not trying to be a dick and insult that or take away from that or anything. But when people have these questions for us about supplements, it's usually through the prism of kind of by the book evidence-based medicine or evidence-based practice. Do you see enough evidence empirically to support this? I'm not seeing the experimental evidence that I would need to justify promoting it as an ergogenic aid.
Yeah, and I just want to add one thing to head off a maybe like a potential criticism of the answer you just gave. So one of the things you said is like you might would have more faith in it if there was more high quality human research on it. One thing that I know that some people's brains will go to is like, well, man, like there's a reason that there's not that much research on it. Like it's an herb, you can't patent it. There's no profit motive. So like people aren't going to pour the same sort of money into research because there's no way that you can like monetize this the same way you could other things. Like that's a common like anti-pharma talking point. But in the case of supplement research, like that just doesn't pass the smell test for reality. Because like a lot of the most studied supplements out there is shit that can't be patented because it's naturally occurring. So like creatine, for example, or caffeine or fish oil. I think those are the three, like 1, 2, and 3, the most studied supplements in existence, and they're all stuff that exists in nature that you can't patent. Like you can package and sell it, but it's the same sort of thing as an herbal extract. So yeah, I know that some people's brains will go there as kind of an explanation for why there's not more high quality human data on it. But in the case of supplementation, that critique just doesn't hold water.
Yeah, and like I said, some of these findings they're just the effect sizes just seem too big to me, and I know that when people hear that, the first thing they think is just like straight up fraud. That's not what I'm suggesting, but like a lot of times with studies, the first few papers that trickle out for any particular supplement or treatment, whatever the case may be, a lot of times we see really inflated effect sizes, and we see effect sizes that are not generalizable, that are not representative of the true effect size. And only after we get a ton of different studies do we start to see, oh, the early phase of research for this ingredient, we saw a lot of publication bias and we saw a lot of inflated effect sizes that were not necessarily due to fraud or anything like that, but they were just sampling error and kind of the like first finders effect, where the first time you do it, there could be several very uninteresting ashwagandha studies that are just kind of sitting in cupboards, in the file drawer, and it's only when you happen to get this kind of non-generalizable but flashy finding do you say, "Oh, this is something that could really make a splash." So, anyway, yeah, I'm not that into it as an ergogenic aid, but if you're into it, hey, more power to you.